Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
Hello, fellow Intentionists. In today's episode, Hilary talks with author, mother, and special needs advocate Amy Webb about her upcoming children's book, When Charley Met Emma, a book about a little boy who meets a little girl at the playground with limb differences. And this is a book that will help kids think about disability, kindness, and how to behave when they meet someone who is different from them. And Amy speaks really honestly about the day that she found out that her daughter would be born with 4 limb abnormalities, and shares the details of her ever-evolving journey of love and advocacy for her daughter, and her mission to create representation and awareness for people with disabilities in her special needs spotlight on her blog. She also gets really specific about the process of getting her children's book published, and how by refining and finding her voice through weekly blogging, she laid a firm foundation for her work as an author. This interview was really inspirational to me personally, not only because I'm interested in the details of creative work and seeing the way people are able to manifest their ideas in the world, but also because these intimate details of Amy's experience that she shares as a mother, and then her ensuing choice to really learn about others, has resulted in this really beautiful educational platform where people can be seen and heard, and she's just really built a lot of access points for understanding around this topic. So a little bit about Amy. Amy Webb, aka Miggy, creator of the blog This Little Miggy Stayed Home, is a writer, artist, warrior mama, and advocate. This Little Miggy is a family and lifestyle blog that shares crafts, recipes, and lifestyle inspiration from the unique yet relatable perspective of a special needs family. Miggy is a passionate advocate for the disability community and writes about the issues her family frequently faces, as well as interviewing other families and individuals with disabilities, with the hope of changing perceptions one story at a time. And her book, When Charley Met Emma, is due to come out in March of 2019, and you can find her online at thislittlemiggy.com. And now here's the interview.
Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to just dive right into your story. And I think your story would be really hard to share without bringing in spirituality, because so much of your journey into motherhood, advocacy, platform building, and now being a published author has been about really following your intuition, laying a foundation, and having faith in the process.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to start by having you taking us back to the day of the ultrasound with your daughter.
Yeah. So I remember that day very clearly. You know, it was my husband and I, and then our only other daughter at the time, our oldest daughter, and we were going to the doctor to find out the sex of the baby. We were very excited. And the little concern I had was that I hadn't been feeling her move that much. Well, the baby, I didn't know for sure if it was a girl. I kind of felt strongly it was, and hoped it was, because I wanted my daughter to have a sister. So when we got there, and I said right away to the ultrasound tech, and I've been a little worried, like I haven't felt the baby move that much. And she said, let's just see here. And, right away she said, I see a heartbeat. Oh, and it looks like your placenta's on the outside of your stomach. So she's like, that's probably why you haven't been feeling the baby move too much. And I was like, okay. All of my concerns were gone. Everything dissipated. She put me right at ease, and we were just happy and smiling and laughing. And in hindsight, I look back and I realized that as we were doing that as a family, that the tech was very quiet and very focused. And at some point, I kind of noticed that she just seemed really, intense on the screen. And I said something like, we wanted to find out the sex. So I said, oh, can you tell if it's a boy or girl yet? And she was like, yeah, I think it's a girl. I think it's a girl. And I remember thinking, like, that's how you're telling us? Like, what?
Yeah.
They usually, do something like, okay, are you ready? And And she just kind of kept working. But even then, I didn't think it was a bigger thing. I thought it was her. And maybe she was just awkward. And then after a couple of minutes, she just stands up to leave. And I go, wait, is that it? And she's like, I'll be right back. And she walks out the door. And my husband and I look at each other. And we know something's up. And then he says to me, I feel like I didn't see an arm or like a hand on the baby, because he has a medical background and he can, where ultrasounds, I can tell more now, but I wasn't really paying that much attention. And I was just like, what? Like so many thoughts going through my head at once. Like, does that even happen? Like, people are born without arms. Like I almost sort of like, and then I was like, I guess that can happen, but like, no, that's not this baby. Like, whatever he thought he saw, no. And I imagined for like a half a minute, oh my gosh, what if I have a little girl without an arm? And no, they just put it right out of my mind. And the doctor walks in, and right away I just say, is everything okay? And he says, no. He said, well, the head, heart, spine, and lungs look fine. It's the limbs, all of them, are misshapen, deformed, or in some cases missing bones altogether. And I mean, that word for word, I'll never forget that sentence. And that was just bam, punch in the gut. And he's continuing to talk. He's just throwing out all these terms like, dwarfism. And I don't know if this is a skeletal dysplasia. And he's just saying this stuff. And it was just like someone was pouring like water over my face. Like, I just can't catch my breath. He's just like, his words are just like, choking me almost. And I finally start to ask a question, and I get like halfway through, and then I just like burst into tears and like bury my face in my hands. And I feel like that's like the only time in my life I've probably legitimately done that. And that was kind of it. And I remember the tech took our oldest daughter out because she was 3 at the time, and she's obviously confused. And, and she's like, let me go get you some crayons, and we just talked to the doctor, and he, immediately he's like, yeah, you need to go see a specialist on Monday. This was a Friday. And we actually were like, well, we're leaving on vacation on Sunday. We're supposed to go on this Disney cruise, like with my husband's family and going to Disney World. So then we're thinking we've got to cancel this vacation. Like, we can't go like this. And I think in my mind, it was sort of like, oh, well, we can't go because they got to fix the baby. Like, somehow for a minute, I'm thinking like, oh, well, we got to go see someone so we can take care of all this. And then realizing, and then after, a little bit, we realized, well, that wasn't going to happen. The situation was going to be what it was going to be. And we ended up going on the vacation. And, the first 24 hours were really hard. And we cried a lot, and we just had so much fear and worry. And then, we had some people in our church, Hilary, we have a Mormon background too. And one of the people had just lost a baby, like the husband, they had just lost a baby like 2 months before. And it was weird because I was actually on the phone with his wife right before our ultrasound, same doctor, she was like, good luck. And she was actually going to I was going to drop my oldest daughter off after the appointment. And we were like, this both happened at the same, she found out their 16 or 18 week ultrasound. Ours was an 18-week ultrasound. And anyway, and I remember saying something that I felt so bad about, like, yeah, wish us luck or something. And then I wanted to kick myself because I thought, oh my gosh, like, don't say that to her. She lost her baby, because like her baby, they ended up, their daughter had a fatal condition. So they came over, the husband came over and someone else, and they gave us blessings. And I really just felt, I really did feel that peace right away. And not that I knew what was going to happen or anything, but I felt like it's going to be okay somehow. And I didn't know what that was going to mean, but it was weird because when I look back on that vacation, it was amazing. We had just gotten that news on Friday, and we were there with my husband's sisters, and they're both like, how are you guys so calm? And I'm just like, I don't know, like, I can't change anything. It is what it is at this point. So
then bring me to, so this is pregnancy. And I remember this so vividly because this was like early days of blogging,
Right.
and you and I were pregnant at the same time, and I've known you since college. And so I had been following you, and I remember you were documenting this because you were just documenting your life. And so then this happened, and you were writing very honestly about it. And I think this has been one of those things where you've continued to, this has been something that has grown, and out of this you've become this amazing advocate. So now we know what it was like before, but then Lamp arrives. And for our listeners, Lamp is her pseudonym,
her
alias.
Name,
her fake blog name. Your daughter's name is not actually Lamp, but that is what you referred to her on the blog, on the blog. So Lamp is born. Yeah. So now what?
That was the amazing thing, is that, when you go through this process of having a pregnancy and you have one of those like terrible ultrasound appointments that no one wants, and you've been given this, what at the time seemed like just horrible news, it's just like all the celebration just kind of goes away, and you're mourning and you're trying to figure things out, and you're, trying to like wrap your mind around it. And, we didn't know what she was going to be like. There was even some concern if her condition was compatible with life. And anyway, but by the end of my pregnancy, again, I was excited for this little girl. And I felt so happy that I was like, yes, I want to celebrate her life. Like, this is my baby. And so that returned, and that was really a huge blessing to me. And so she was born, and I, just immediately loved her, and immediately, I don't know, it was just like I just had no fears anymore. And it, and again, this is personal. I know that is not everyone's story, but I really just, things were going to be okay. And, through my pregnancy, we had seen so many specialists, and we live in Cincinnati now, and we've lived in Cincinnati at the time, even though we were gone for a while in between. So at the time we're at Cincinnati, and this is one of the top children's hospitals in the country. And so people are assuring us, oh, you guys are in the right place. You're very lucky to be here. Yet we would see these team of specialists who'd say, I've never seen anything like this. I have no idea what to expect. And so there was one doctor out of that time who said, this could just be physical. You could just go home after 4 days and have like an otherwise healthy baby. And I was sort of pissed at that doctor, because I thought, don't set me up for, disappointment and heartache. Because it just seems so like, what are the chances it's only going to be, her limbs? But anyway, that's what happened. She was in the NICU for an hour. They checked her out. She was otherwise healthy and fine. She was eating fine. And she came home with us after 4 days. And so then it was just, and the great thing about having a daughter with a physical disability and a newborn is they're just as helpless as any other newborn, right? And so it was very, the newborn phase was just very normal, and everything was really typical. We did suddenly have a lot more appointments, and we had a lot of people coming to our house. And I would say in general, our first year sort of existed around the hospital. She did end up having, the only other issue she kind of had that first year was that she also had a really small stomach. That's part of her diagnosis. And so we had a G-tube placed. And even though G-tubes, which are feeding tubes that you can pump like food into directly through their stomach or medicine or anything, they're usually pretty straightforward. And for some reason, we just had one that kept coming out a lot, and we had a lot of issues. But yeah, that first year, and even for the next few years, our lives really revolved around hospital therapy. When she was a year old, we moved to San Antonio. We spent the next few years going to therapy 3 times a week, every week. They didn't come to our house. So I was, running around 3 times a week, taking her to therapy, and then whatever doctor's appointments on top of that. But the other thing was just, that was just kind of like the timeline, I guess, and sort of, what life was like. But I also think the thing that really came from it was this understanding of how much it didn't matter that she had this disability.
Right. That's something that I've noticed as someone who's followed your blog and, your Instagram for 15 years, decade, I don't know, however long it's been, is just how, first of all, she seems to have like the coolest personality. And then it's also like so normal, like it's normal. And I love that you provide a window into, you're this artist and now an author, which we'll get to that in a minute, but it's just normal.
And I think, there is this progression of, I'm not born with a disability. I'm a special needs mom. And I've learned that there's a big difference between that. And so when she was born, everything was new to us. So everything she did was fascinating and it was amazing. And so there is this progression where I think at the beginning, we were interested in her body and how it worked all the time. And although at the time we didn't have to worry too much about special tools or anything yet because she was a baby. So at the beginning, I think, I'm trying to think of how to explain this eloquently, but you're right. It's so normal now. But at the beginning, we were, I don't want to say fascinated, but maybe that's a good word to use for it. Like when she started using her feet for things, it first started with like her picking up little fishy crackers and eating them with her feet. And that was so exciting to me because we didn't show her how to do that. She just did it. And, for your listeners, it might help to kind of know a little bit what her body is like. So she doesn't have most of her left arm. She has a very short right arm. It's a little bit longer right arm, but it stops about where the elbow is. And she doesn't have a typical hand on that arm. So she doesn't have a opposing thumb. So she can't pick up things with her hands. Her legs are both a lot shorter than typical, and one leg is even shorter than the other one, but she has 2 feet and she has 9 little toes. And so her toes and her feet are basically her hands. But again, when she was little and, all her limbs were affected, we didn't know, I didn't know, would she be able to use her feet effectively? And so all of that at the beginning was very exciting for us. And then, as time wore on, as things just became more normal, it normalized for us. And as you know, one thing I did on my blog when she was about a year old, I said, because I wrote about it the whole time. And a big part of writing about it was we had so many friends and family. It was the easiest way to get this information out there all at once. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, this was back, like you said, in the kind of early days of blogging where everyone had a blog. And, I just thought most of our friends and family were reading it. And then it was really that writing became cathartic and a way for me to process sort of, this unique parenting experience I was having and just all the ups and downs of, your life revolving around medical appointments and hospital visits and the very public nature of her differences because they're so visible, kind of learning to deal with that.
I want to talk about that for a second, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite posts that you've done have been in the spirit of helping kind of well-intentioned people know what to do and say and act and interact with someone who is differently abled.
Yeah.
So how can parents have these sensitive conversations with their kids about inclusivity? What is the right way to approach this situation from your perspective as a mother and where this is, your daughter's experiencing life in on the one hand, I say normal, and I don't mean to minimize,
right. No, I know
what the gravity of the situation, but also just that when I watch the way you live your life, it's very, in my opinion, very aspirational. And, it just seems very rooted and grounded in like everyone is treated equally in your family. Like it doesn't seem like there's any there's no shame.
So.
There's no,
daughter's
that way. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a fly on your wall, but I'm just saying from the outside,
right.
It's great.
Yeah.
What are some ways that we as people, as parents, how can we be more sensitive? How can we be more inclusive?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think the first thing is talking to your kids about differences, ideally before, they see it maybe for the first time in real life or out in public. And so library books can be a great way, maybe finding videos online. I know a lot of parents will go to my blog even and just kind of look through some of my interviews because I have photographs and just kind of share pictures of kids who might look different. Obviously, not all differences are something you can see, but for young children, when they do see those differences, that is when you get, a strong reaction for someone like my daughter. And so I think just talking to them about it in a way that you would talk about, race or anything else, where you say, that they're just born different and that's just how they were born. That's how God made them, whatever wording you feel comfortable. That's why I feel so strongly about that representation and exposing kids to things because again, as part of this journey of like my understanding in the beginning, I was like, well, of course I understand, little kids have never seen anyone like her before. And I understand their curiosity and I still do. And I believe very much, and I've always tried to be someone who educates kids around us, that maybe have questions and stuff. But the further along I got into it, I realized like, oh, they've never seen anyone like that because purposely they've been left out of the media. They've been left out of these things because 20% of the world has a disability of some kind. I mean, it's the largest minority group in the world. You know, it's a population the size of China. And when you look around at media and magazines and children's books and TV shows, you don't see anywhere near that representation. And so then for a while,
and that's really a conversation that we're seeing happening. I mean, this is a conversation that's happening around race, around disability, around, I mean, this concept of representation seems to be so important. And it's like happening right now in real time. But I think you started your special needs spotlight. How long ago did you start your special needs spotlight? I wanted to talk about that really quick.
Yeah, I believe about 7 years ago. I think it was when she was around a year old. So yeah.
And I personally was unaware of anything else like that online that I could find.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's like early stages when you think of where we've come as a society. I mean, now we're seeing a lot more representation. We're seeing way less. There's a lot of women's brands now that aren't airbrushing. They're showing, postpartum bodies. And it's like really awesome.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's amazing.
I think this is a much better world for our daughters.
Could you
and sons to
imagine
be
if
growing
we
up
had been teenagers when they weren't airbrushing? I don't know. I just think about how would that how would that have impacted me?
And even like the fitness craze, right? Yeah. Like I see it even on Instagram now. Like everyone is so obsessed and great, like good for people for exercising and being healthy. Like there's no problem with that, but just the extremes of it and the obsession with youth. I mean, it's there's definitely a larger tension at play. Yeah. So you started your spotlight 7 years ago. Right. What is the time commitment like? And can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the Special Needs Spotlight is?
Yeah, sure. So the Special Needs Spotlight, when I started it, because I was documenting our journey online, and it was so cathartic for me, I thought, I want to give other parents this opportunity to have a platform. And at the time, I really just thought about other special needs parents, because that's what I was. And I also, in a way, I think I wanted to sort of have other people just kind of get this peek in of what our normal looks like, because that is what was interesting and different, I know, for so many people. And so it just started with, and it's funny because I look back and I remember telling my husband, like, I'm gonna interview someone and have them on the blog like every Friday. And he was like, every Friday you're gonna try this? I'm like, yeah. And not that he wasn't supportive. I just think he was like, that could be a lot. Like, are you sure? And so I remember I started, I reached out to some people I'd met online and just started with 2 people. And I just kind of went from there. And so the first, all it is it's an interview that I feature on my blog every week. And now, of course, there's, I've thought about doing podcasts or video. I mean, there's so many other ways it could go. But I've still done it the same way. It's just, I email them. I ask, there's 5 to 7 questions that they're usually pretty much the same one. Sometimes they're tweaked depending on the person, their story. And, people answer the questions. They send in, some pictures, and it's just this peek into what their life is like with maybe this kid and their diagnosis. And it really, it just became, I think when I started it, I thought, I want to show everyone kind of what our life is like. This is sort of like, I'm in this club. You all don't know. Let me give you a window into it. And I pretty quickly realized that I know nothing, that I was just as in the dark about it. I may have known our little experience, but that's all I really knew. And it really became an education for me and for everyone else. And there were so many weeks where I just had tears running down my cheek and just really felt like this, felt like a holy thing I was doing week to week, depending on these stories. Time commitment wise, it depends. Now I'm, lucky enough where I can, put it out something on Instagram or something and say, hey, if you want to be a part of it, and people email me, because it really did get hard trying to chase down people. And occasionally I still will seek someone out if it's someone specific that I want to feature, but usually I ask people to come to me. And it's just the time commitment of doing the emails back and forth. There's a lot that I can copy and paste, but I do, when I send the questions, I copy and paste the individual questions, and I go back and I personalize each one for people as I do it, because I really want that personal thing. I don't want them to feel like it's a form letter, and then they send it back, and then it's editing and, doing all that stuff with the blog post.
So how has this process helped you to ground into where you are today as an advocate and a mother?
I don't think I would be it without it. I mean, I would know I wouldn't. I think a lot of people assume that a lot of my understanding and my my dedication comes just from being Lamb's mom, when I would say it's got to be at least equally split with having done these interviews. Because along the way, I started interviewing adults who were disabled and getting that firsthand account. That's what really started to help me shift my perspective of, because my perspective before was, oh, I'm a mom going through this. I had this baby who has this difference. And now I realize, this is my daughter is disabled and this is her life. And as much as I am there with her through a lot of it, I don't experience it. I'm not in her body. I don't see it through her eyes. And so when I started to interview individuals, I feel like that is when my eyes were really open to the importance of advocacy, to what ableism is, and to understanding that and I knew I was already experiencing at times this discrimination, or that my daughter was experiencing it, or sometimes we as a family were experiencing, but I didn't realize it had its own term for people who are disabled, and that's what ableism is. And so, yeah, it just opened my eyes to this whole, it was almost like, I don't know, just like being given the new set of eyes and just like, oh my gosh, what I thought I was seeing, I wasn't really seeing,
That's really what I take away from the spotlight when I read it, is it's a deeper empathy. And it's a realization of bringing awareness to my own life and how I can show up differently and be a better person in how I treat other people, where before you kind of, your natural reaction is like, I don't know what to do and I don't want to do the wrong thing. So
Right.
I'm just not going to do anything, and I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to like look at the ground.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking of like, how do we go in? And I think that doing the special needs spotlight, it's not only a window, but it's also, there's always this conversation that you follow up with. And I've seen you do this multiple times through Facebook posts and other things that I know I've shared with on my feed, because I'm like, moms, this is, as a mom, my kid will make a comment that you're just like, you can't control them, they're children, but you want to try to help. This is how we create a more empathetic world, is by really understanding. And like you said, if there's no representation for people with disabilities in the media, then they're not visible, right? They're visible in our daily lives, but like, how are we really creating a space if they're not represented on a larger scale? So I love that you're doing that work. I think it's such important, like, really make a difference type of work.
Yeah. I realized, a few years ago, I wrote a post called, I think I called it something like, "What's Really Wrong?" And it was the realization that, my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, was sometimes regularly being asked, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. Oh, what's wrong with you?" And you think about a person being asked that all the time by complete strangers, and you're only 6 years old. And what does that do to you over a lifetime? Mm. And I realized, and it took me a while to see it, but this idea of representation, it's not just like, oh, I want my kid to be seen because, she, just for the sake of being seen. It was when you have a lack of awareness on a macro level, you have a heightened awareness on a micro level. And so it's this awareness that has a real impact on her life. I mean, she has literally been at playgrounds, or I can think of like the Disney cruise, where she has been surrounded by a group of children. This has happened more than one time, wondering what's going, pointing or staring or asking her questions. I mean, my husband and I have been there, thankfully, but I mean, that is the real impact, that kind of ignorance. And it's not the kids' fault that the world that we, have cultivated they don't see anyone. They've never seen anyone like her, literally. And because of that, they just, she kind of has this lack of privacy because of it. And so in some ways, I think sometimes people are like, oh, wow, you're so public with her, and you're, this or that. And, and is that okay with her? And I'm like, listen, she lives this every day. She is front and center every day. And she has seen me since she was a very young age, talk through this with kids. And so she knows, as much as she doesn't like it, she knows that what I'm doing is trying to like dissipate, that for her and make it easier, because either way that conversation's happening,
Well, this is world-changing stuff. Like this type of mental shift. This like you were saying, macro shift. I mean, that's stuff that changes the way people do things, and the ripple effect goes on. And this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you today, because I look at, our podcast is called The Intentionists, and it's about intentional living and kind of following your heart and doing the kind of work that has these types of ripple effects. So I want to talk to you about what the impetus was for creating a children's book. I know we've been talking about representation, but like at what point were you like, this needs to happen? And talk to me a little bit about the process of the children's book that you have coming out.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you asked, because this is actually like, I love talking about this process as much as the book itself, because I think it was really important. Have you read Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic? Have you read that book?
I have it, and I have thumbed through it, and I'm so familiar with it, but I've not actually read the book. And everybody asks me, have you read this book? And I'm like, I need to read this book.
Calling your name. So once again, the universe is telling you to read the book.
Yeah.
There's a part of the book, and I think she even does this on her TED Talk, where she kind of talks about like ideas being this like ethereal, they're sort of like out in the universe, you know, and that we're not these brilliant geniuses who come up with everything, but like the ideas are out there. And if you're open to it, they kind of land on you. That was very much the experience I had. I was actually at a blogging conference, and I had been thinking specifically about this message that I wanted to share for a long time, and thinking, how can I get this message out in the world? And I'd written blog posts about it, and that was great. And they got shared often. The blog post being like, how do you navigate a special needs encounter? Kind of like you were asking earlier, you know, what do we do as parents when our kids, you know, see someone or whatever? And so I'd written that blog post, and I was at this conference, and I remember talking to these women and telling them kind of my story. And one of them was like, you should write a book. I'm like, yeah, I know. I plan on doing that. And it, you know, and then she was like, no, I mean like a children's book. And that is when like the idea, like the universe literally was like, hello, McFly, like, you know, this is for you. Yes. And I was like, you know, it was very much like oh my gosh, that's it. And I got very excited about it immediately. And, you know, and I'm at the right place, because we actually saw each other at Alt years ago. As you know, it's just like a creative, like, you know, you just kind of come away feeling really inspired. You hear a lot of people, you meet a lot of people, you learn a ton. So I have this idea there. And while I'm there, a couple days, like it's the last day of the party. I wonder if this was even the one I saw you at. So they do like a big closing party. And I remember at this closing party, they specifically had this woman named Marilee Lydiard, who is a Mermag blog, and she makes these beautiful dolls, and she's an illustrator. She's just amazing. They had her sitting down doing illustrations, so you could like wait in line for a portrait done by Marilee. So a lot of people are doing it. I was like, yeah, I want my portrait done by her. Wait in line for like 45 minutes. I get up to the front, and she sees me, and she's like, she, you know, starts to draw. And then she's like, wait, is your name Amy? And did you go to BYU Hawaii 20 years ago? And I was like, wait, yeah, like we know each other. She's like, yeah, you would probably wouldn't remember me, but yeah, like I just had this flash of recognition. And I was just like, holy shiz, she's going to illustrate my book. I just had that, like, this is my illustrator. And I was like,
I love that, by the way. I freaking love these stories. This is like what I live for. I live for this. I'm like, oh my gosh, really at a conference, like, and then 20 years ago, and then this, oh my gosh.
You know, like, this is why I really felt like the universe literally was like, this is what you're going to do. And I had felt the, like, you know, some of these, and kind of like putting it out there, like, okay, help me, you know?
Yeah.
If you want me to do this, help me. So,
well, because on top of this, like you've been doing this spotlight, like this has been 10 years in the making, right? Like been,
I mean, at the time, like maybe 5 years. Yeah. But years in the making. I mean, so as of right now, I think I've done 220 some interviews. So at the time I was probably at 100 something, you know, cause it, you know, 7 years, if you do the math, it really hasn't been every single week, obviously. But still it's been,
but hundreds of interviews, Amy. I mean, that's
right.
That's a master's degree, you know,
and that's really what it was it. Yeah. I mean, when I look back, it didn't start with the book. It started with this idea I had and doing a little thing consistently week after week, year after year. You know what I mean?
Really refining your voice, right? Like knowing where you can speak up, where you, because how to say that, you know?
Yeah, because then on top of it, I'm learning these ideas, I'm seeing perspectives. That's leading me to writing these other blog posts that are giving me all sorts of ideas. So yeah, it was all like building on top of it. Anyway, I'm still at this conference, and I'm leaving the conference, and I'm still having this like, okay, universe, like if there's anything else you can do, help me out. And I go to the airport. And I go to the airport security line. I get right behind this woman named Rachel Fawcett, who runs a blog called Handmade Charlotte, which is very well known. She's done, you know, collaborations with like Anthropology. And I mean, she's like a badass businesswoman. She was like one of the main speakers at all, like not someone I would have ever walked up to and had any business talking to. But I'm also like, oh, I'm here for it. Like, okay.
The universe answered my prayer, and she's in front of the security line.
Security line with this lady. So
Yes.
we start chatting, and she's, and what do you do, and what do I do, and we're sharing everything, and she's like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. And she asked me, like, well, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to make a product line? Are you going to do this? And I was like, actually, I want to write a children's book. And she was like, oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, I have all these contacts in the publishing world. Like, I'll give you all of them. Like, yes. And I am just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, this is incredible. So I'm just excited. And she gives me her business card. I get all sorts of excited. And I start writing the book on the plane ride home. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is happening. I'm probably going to have a book deal within like 2 months. I'll probably be like presenting my book at the next, this will be perfect. Like I have obviously no idea what I'm doing.
I totally get the timeline idea. Yes, this is. Yes.
And so I go home and get to work on it. And I remember telling my husband, and he's like, okay, like do it. And I look back now and I really feel like the reason those things happened was to give me that motivation, that excitement that I needed to keep going through it, because it definitely was not 2 months. It took 2 years to, get a publisher to finish the book. And once the publisher reached out and we signed the deal, it still was like another year and a half, almost 2 years, year and a half to get to where I actually have the book now. So, but the other amazing thing about Marilee, to kind of round back to the illustrators, I reached out to her after the conference, told her my idea. And I said, would you want to illustrate this book? And she was amazing because she worked in the publishing industry. So she had all this information for me. And she said, you actually don't normally pitch books together. She's like, normally if you're just an author, you pitch your book and then they find an illustrator separately. That being said, she's like, I really do love this idea. I think that because we kind of have come from this similar world, that we might be able to pitch this together. And so then I was even more excited, thinking like, okay, great, Marilee's on board. But a few months into it, she had to pull out, and she said she was just too busy. And I understood. I mean, she was running a business. She was creating all these new brands and doing all this other stuff. So she couldn't really afford to put work in for free for something that, wasn't her vision, wasn't sure it was going to happen. And she just had a lot on her plate. And I totally understood. So, but she was a valuable resource, gave me tons of information, and kind of a similar thing happened with the woman, Rachel. She kind of fell off the radar, not because she wanted to. She did end up writing me back, but it was a while later. She had been really sick. She did hook me up with the publishing contacts, but that's not how I ended up getting the publisher. In the end, I got I found a publisher when I kind of put it out on my blog in a post that I was trying to, get a children's book published, even though I wanted to keep it private, because I was like, I don't want to be the girl who says I've written a children's book and like not get it published. You just want to be able to like be like, ta-da, I did this thing and none of you knew about it. But again, I felt that tug from the universe to say like, put it on a blog post. And in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, it's the same blog post I just mentioned, called the one I was talking about, called, What's Really Wrong. It was that same blog post. I finished the post, I closed it. And then I felt this like, no, you got to talk about your book, because you're talking about representation, put it out there that you're trying to add to this. And so I put it out there and had a woman who worked for a publishing company who was a special needs mom and who read my blog say, hey, I'd love to pass the manuscript on to my bosses. I can't promise anything. And that's how it happened. And then in the end, when I signed the contract and I said, hey, I really would love to see if we could get Marilee to be the illustrator, they were able to get her. And it all worked out.
And so she ended up becoming the actual illustrator of the book.
The illustrator
years later.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. Do you think that there's part of it's just, like you said, part of it's just the process and patience and waiting for the universe and to kind of line things up and all of that. But do you feel like there was part of the process where it was almost like there was a point when you were just talking where you mentioned that when you turned your focus outward, where it wasn't like this book that I want to create, that's for me, where it became about the audience and really about, I want to add to that. You used the phrase, I wanted to be the one to add to that representation. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that was the focus. That was obviously part of the initial vision, but it almost seemed like there's a part where there was a letting go.
Well, I think the letting go was actually the spotlight and the process of what I had learned doing that for years. That was at the beginning of the spotlight. It was like, this is our story. Like, this is our club. You guys don't know what's going on. And then I realized, oh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know anything. And by the time the book came around, that was definitely something of feeling like I had this bigger message that I wanted to get, that I needed to find a way to get out into the world. So, but but the letting go of it being about me, I think very much got refined over the years of blogging, and even in other ways. I mean, I don't know if you felt this, Hilary, but there were times that some really big time blogger would link to my blog, and I'd have like this crazy amount of traffic. And I'd be like, all right, this is it. I'm on a different road now. I'm going to be, and then, I'd kind of think it was my big break. And then I'd like traffic would go back down to like what it was. Or I'd even be like, I was on the front cover of some big like AOL.com once. And I would get little recognition over the years that I would kind of think like, okay, it's going to change things. And then it would go back down. And I think that I'm really glad that I had that experience of just like, kind of riding those kind of highs through and being like, yeah, it's cool. Like I was featured in an Australian magazine once, and then it was just like, it was really cool, but it was just like, okay, I'm still me. This is still just what I do week after week, and it's not. And so I think that letting go was like years of that, and realizing that there's always going to be that flux. It's always going to go up and down, and it's about your method.
Well, you've laid such a foundation, and you see like where there are certain people on Instagram or blogging or whatever, and they blow up, and there's something about timing and like what the zeitgeist is into, if it's like fashion blogging, or if you're at the, yoga. There was like a big spike a couple years ago of like, basically if you're kind of like almost naked doing a yoga pose,
you're in,
then you go. And I follow some of those people, but you know what I'm saying, that it's good for them, but And I think with what you're doing, it's like a longer reach, and it's really thoughtful, and there is such a foundation here, and you've refined your point of view to such a degree that, I think of you as really an expert in this area. You're someone who I would be like, I want to read her column every week to like, tell me how to live my life in this way. So is there anything else that you wanted to mention about your upcoming book? Like, what would you want the listeners to know about the book, and where can they find it to purchase?
So it's on pre-sale at Amazon.com right now. I don't know when this post or when this.
And what's the title?
So the title is When Charley Met Emma. And the actual like release date is March 12th. I believe after that, I think it will be in like Barnes and Noble and some other retailers. Some people have reached out to me and said, like someone said, oh, I wanted to get it ordered for my local library, but they already had it on order. I think, I think even overseas, someone said they were able to get it. So I think Amazon mainly is the best place probably to look right now, but I hope it'll be available more places as well.
And I love this idea to buy one for yourself and then buy a second one to either donate to your school or to give to a friend.
That was I had so many people telling me that on Instagram when I announced pre-orders were on sale. I was like in tears. I just couldn't believe how many people bought a copy for their children's schools, or if they had multiple children going to different schools, all their schools or their local library. I was so touched by that. And I think, so as far as like what I want readers to know about the book, I would say, for me, the purpose of the book is multifold. And one of the ones that I've already touched upon is representation. And so if you are someone who cares about, you want the books in your home to reflect the values you have, and you care about that representation. So you have books that have people of color and, maybe feminist books and those kind of things. I would just say this is, one of the reasons I did this was to have that book. So when your kid or whoever's kid is out in the world and sees someone like my daughter, because the little girl on the cover, she doesn't have any hands. She has 2 shorter arms, and then she's in a wheelchair. So it's just, and she's right there on the cover, which I love. And she's beautiful. She's standing next to her friend, Charley, who is typical. And so to me, it's about, helping our kids learn from an early age. Like, people are born like that. That happens. And it's cool.
Right. And kind of demystifying, what's going on.
Is perfect. Yeah.
So how can our listeners connect with you? Can you tell us your blog and social media links?
Yes. So my blog is This Little Miggy Stayed Home. So Miggy it's actually a take off my middle name, which is Manon. So it was my like alias for a long time. And then on Instagram, it's This Little Miggy, and Facebook, This Little Miggy. So that's pretty much all my handles are This Little Miggy.
Yes. And give her a follow. And like I said, if you want to go onto Amazon, pre-order When Emma Met Charley and get a couple copies, give them to your friends. I'm so happy for you, Amy. This is great. And I think that, like you said, you were moved by people wanting to buy one and then another. It's like, this is what I think long-term foundation building is, that you have people who are truly invested and want to see you succeed. And I think that's got to feel rewarding and feel good.
It does. And, and just like you said, it's also, we're at the right moment. People want this. People want to see, we want to see the world as it really is. We don't want airbrushed. We don't want all size zeros. Like, we want to see the world as it really is. And the beauty of that diversity. And so that's what's really great, is I think people are excited for this book because they want to have that resource for their kids,
And I think people do feel, we're in this kind of unsettling, everyone's so unsettled. There's a lot of noise. And so when people can do something, this is a way that you can do something to continue to propel consciousness into what I think is the right direction. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is how we do it. We support artists. We support people who have missions that we align with. We continue to focus on what's good in the world. We continue to wake up every morning and look outside and choose to see what's really there, but then also see what's possible and how can we move into the better.
Absolutely.
And with that, Amy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being on the show with us.
Oh my gosh. Well, it was my pleasure.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.